All right, y'all. This week we are jumping in to discussing sort of the framework behind and a few of the existing criminal justice policies that exist. Ultimately, these are policies that influence the day to day operations here in the US. Some of them go on day to day without us thinking about them because perhaps we're not the ones out there committing crimes being directly impacted by the consequences of the policies. But honestly, on a day to day basis, whether you know it or not, these policies are impacting you. They're impacting you by keeping you safe. They're impacting you by adjusting and changing according to our morals within the country, and they're impacting you by how they impact the community in which you exist. So, without further ado, let me start to explain some of those confusing phrases that you just heard. Now, if you think back to your early criminology courses that focused on theory, you'll hear things or remember things such as social control or deterrence. Well, yeah, that all plays into why our laws are actually created. Ultimately, they exist as a means of forbidding and preventing people from committing crimes or engaging in behaviors that will actually cause harm to another individual or multiple individuals or any form of public interest. Now, we really want to control behaviors. Think about it. You come to a four-way stop, all four people have stop signs, because if we didn't have those stop signs, what would happen? If in your head you're picturing a crash where four cars just land in the middle at the same time, then you're spot on, right? We have, and we all agree to, certain forms of restrictions and give up certain freedoms so that we are maintaining a safer environment. Ultimately, it also is supposed to provide us with the safeguard that lets us know that if we follow these rules, we are not being deemed criminal, but if we disregard them or break them, in fact, we now have a new title. It would be criminal. It also gives fair warning. Everyone knows about them. These laws exist. They're written. Anyone and everyone who wants to see them can find them. I recommend looking up your state laws. It's kind of interesting to see and maybe perhaps comparing them to other state laws. And ultimately, they are used to differentiate between different types of offenses, right? We have infractions, misdemeanors, felonies, and all of which have their own forms of punishment that are supposed to be, and I use that phrase intentionally, that are supposed to be proportionate to their crimes at hand. And we'll definitely come back to that statement, right? The idea that punishment should be proportionate to the offense, and whether or not we really think that's happening. So how are policies developed? Well, lots of legislatures come together, they talk, they try to figure out what works, and make their best educated guesses, which is why we often think of policies as approaches, because it's an approach to a problem. It's one way that they think a problem can be solved. Ultimately, we hope, and hope is a very bold word here, we hope that these policies are not made up from thin air, that they do not come from moral panics, that there is in fact evidence or theory that led them to the decision to take this approach. But honestly, there's many instances in which our policies fail. And there are three key reasons that policies fail. One is the misinterpretation or the lack of use of theories and research, right? The idea that if we just take what we hear and we go with it without actually having supporting evidence behind it, it's probably not going to work. Partial implementation. This is when some parts of the policy get followed, but other parts don't get followed in any way, shape, or form. And then, of course, the complete ignorance of theory, right? The idea that theory is useless, that there's no basis behind what theory is. And this is going to become the basis of basically all of your assignments throughout this semester. is tying all of our policies back to theory so you can see which policies out there had complete ignorance of theory. You'll see if anyone misinterpreted the theory or the research, and then you'll see if there's only partial implementation. So our whole goal this semester is to really, really critique policies to see if we can pinpoint exactly why they failed. And there are those three reasons: misinterpretation, partial implementation, or ignorance. And then y'all are going to have to find a way to fix these policies. Our policies are typically developed during these particular scenarios, during times of political or societal change. If you start to see, our presidential changes, you might see policies and laws sort of shift and change. Societal change, an example would be in our country, there's many areas where marijuana has become legalized, and that would be due to our societal changes. When we have activists, academic crusaders, or people out there who are really lobbying and pushing for change, I would say one example. I used to teach at Plymouth State University in New Hampshire. Beautiful campus in the middle of the mountains. And there were often individuals out there with clipboards who would be working towards policy change on environmental justice, things like pollution, and whatnot. So it really does take a lot of people to push and make those changes, but policies can come about from that. Major events and tragedies, if you don't know this, but back in the day, you used to be able to go to the airport without having to go through those security lines. Those are a direct result from our terrorist attack on 9/11. There are instances in which we see the three strikes law, which is going to come up again shortly, that occurred as a result of some tragedies that happened. And then, of course, we hope that a lot of our policies stem from evidence-based practices. Those are instances in which we start to see people implementing different types of programs or strategies. And as we see and test them, the more we find them working, the more this can then lead to policy changes. I've got a lot of examples of these that I'll be sharing, particularly from my own work. Now, remember, our focus this semester is going to be on critiquing and improving policies. So this slide is important, and you'll see I have failed policies here again. Now, when we enact policies, we're not doing it willy-nilly. The goal isn't just to throw policies out there and hope they stick. I mean, I guess in some ways they kind of are. But our hope is always that these policies are going to be quote-unquote good. And in order for them to be good, the most obvious thing we need is for it to be effective. Is it actually accomplishing what it was set out to accomplish? Does it do what it is intended to do? Is it working? It looks at the externalities. What is happening as a result of this policy? Are there some positives and other benefits that are occurring because of this policy? Perhaps are there other consequences that are happening? What also is just going on? What comes out of this policy? Efficiency looks at how the policy is doing things. Are they doing so in a manner that is logical, organized? Are they utilizing resources that exist, or are they dumping money into it? My favorite, and I'm going to say it over and over again, theory. What is the purpose of studying and understanding criminal behavior and figuring out why people engage in criminality if we don't even use it when we're trying to combat it? Of course, of utmost importance is the constitutionality of it. Are we ensuring that we're not violating any constitutional rights? Equity focuses on the fact that anyone and everyone is treated the same way, that we're not focusing on targeting one specific group of individuals more so than others. And then there has to be a measurable effect. How do we know if it's working? What is the proof? Where is the quantitative data that shows us this policy is in fact doing what it's supposed to do? And you'll see in a lot of instances when it comes to criminal justice policy that one of the things we use for measurable effects is recidivism. And I do not want you to forget, because I'm expecting to see in your responses and in your work this semester where policies failed. So I'm going to say them again. Policies fail when there is misinterpretation of theories and research, when there is only partial implementation, or when theory is just disregarded in its entirety. Politics, 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 politics. The political influence is always at hand within our criminal justice policies. Think about it. That is where our public policies are developed. That's where the funds and resources come from and where they get allocated. And honestly, it's where the conversations start. I find it really fascinating. I once had a conversation with a group of political science professors, and I talked about all sorts of things. Like, well, it's really great that you all are out there, advocating for policies, and that you're talking to folks about legislation, and you're doing this and you're doing that. And I got really excited about it. And I said, when it comes to those criminal justice policies, what are you teaching in your classes? Like, what are you doing to educate them so that when they go to these different, meetings and meet with different politicians, how are they advocating? What is it that they know about criminal justice to be advocating for, these policies that directly impact the lives of many? Zero of the faculty said that they discuss anything pertinent to criminal justice. The closest they get to anything criminal justice is constitutional law. They don't talk about why people do what they do. They don't talk about the, causes of crime. They just talk about how to develop policies and various other things. Research consistently shows that individuals who lean more conservatively focus on heavily punishing offenders. Their predominant goal is crime control. Crime control, crime control, crime control. So their policies tend to be a bit more punitive, whereas liberal individuals tend to be focused on due process rights, making sure that their Miranda rights are spoken, that we have the opportunity to speak to an attorney, right? All those things that you actually tend to see on our television shows. They do tend to be pretty accurate when they focus on those due process rights. It's important to note that in the United States, crime control does tend to lead the way when it comes to our policies. Go ahead and look through some of our Supreme Court cases and outcomes. You'll see that, crime control does tend to lead the way, but due process is always an underlying factor within all things criminal justice policy. Of course, elections come into play. We can vote on issues, and that can lead to change. So in Massachusetts, I remember very distinctly when marijuana was legalized and how excited people were to see it on the ballot. And then, of course, whatever is happening politically across the country can shape our policies in our own states, but also nationally. So politics, 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 politics always have an influence in the policies, which, it makes sense, that are being enacted. Sometimes you take classes in college and you're like, when am I ever going to use this? Well, when you took criminology or criminological theories, it is coming into play all semester this semester with our class. So the theoretical influence in the development of policies is imperative, right? I've already told you in numerous ways that theory should be the shape of policies, because how can you create a solution to a problem if you don't look at the cause of the problem, right? Like it's just so obvious. Or at least it is to you and I, but for some reason it's not always obvious during policy development. So criminologists go out there and they conduct research on an almost daily basis, right? They're out there collecting their data, reviewing data, and looking at what is actually causing criminality. Therefore, we can then suggest ways to address those causes. I personally do a lot of research that focuses on programs that seek to reduce recidivism. So I recently finished up on 8 years worth of different programs at a local jail. Some of their programs worked really well. Some of their programs didn't work quite so well. But we worked on tweaking those programs so that when they continued moving forward, offering these programs, they are making sure that what they're doing aligns with the needs of these individuals. I also do work with district attorney's office where we're looking at diversion programs. What can we do to help individuals who are addicted to drugs kick their addiction so that their crimes start to sort of dissipate a bit more? So honestly, it's really those folks out there evaluating what is being done by our criminal justice agencies who really truly know what is working and what isn't working. I'm also the editor of Crime and Delinquency, which is a peer-reviewed journal, and every single article that comes through my journal has to have policy implications, because what good is doing research if there's no practical application that can occur? And honestly, what we're finding is that there's usually some form of multi-systemic approach, because it's not just one thing that causes crime. There's often multiple risk factors here at play. Therefore, any programming or policy has to be sure that it's addressing the various needs of the individuals engaging in criminality, right? There's no one size fits all policy, despite the fact that, we probably want that to be the case. There's just no way. There's just no way. Think about Cinderella's shoe, right? Her glass slipper. They tried it on all of the women and it only fit one. All right, so that's how we start to think about policies and programs, right? It's not going to fit everybody's specific needs. It has to be multi-systemic. Media. Gosh, is there any way to avoid the media? I mean, even without cable, I'm still influenced by the media, by the shows that I watch, the books that I read, the music that I listen to, right? There's all sorts of ways that people, without even realizing that they're doing so, consume media on the criminal justice system. I find it fascinating. I've been teaching since 2012, that often on the first day of classes, when I ask people, hey, why are you interested in criminal justice? And what is it that brought you to this field? Almost all of them have some sort of connection to a television show. Criminal Minds, NCIS, SWAT, cops, so on and so forth. I mean, the list goes on and on and on how many television shows exist based on the criminal justice system. Right? I'm sure you're thinking of your own right now. Like, oh yeah, that one's my favorite. Or, oh no, I can't stand that show. But nonetheless, you can name numerous shows related to something crime. Something criminal. And I think one of the biggest issues is that a lot of folks can't separate the exaggerated versions of our system to what happens in reality. I've had many conversations throughout my time as a criminologist with people who genuinely believe that what they see on TV is really not all that far off from what happens in the real world. But ultimately, we know that regardless of how or what you're consuming, media does in fact shape your own perceptions. We start to internalize what we see in the media and turn them into facts, which ultimately believes that we assume whatever we're seeing, whatever we're hearing is reality. My mother, for a long time, was very fearful that something would happen to me. And so every Christmas, I would receive some sort of self-defense device. Mace. I actually was gifted brass knuckles at one point. Whistles. I mean, honestly, the list goes on and on of all the things I have somewhere in a box. Because what she would see on the news every night when she got home from work was always the really terrible stories. Because you don't hear about, the little minor things that are happening. No, we only hear about those major violent and heinous crimes. I used to be a big believer of what our system is based on. Innocent until proven guilty. Well, back in the day, that worked. It worked. It was easy to be innocent until proven guilty because there was no such thing as folks videotaping or recording or whatever what was happening. And now, when a crime occurs, all you have to do is log into any form of social media and it's all over the place. It's all over the place. And so it really does impact jurors' decisions because they're thinking about what they've consumed. They're thinking about whether, it be the immediate case in front of them or what they've heard prior in the news about different types of offenders or what they've seen on TV. And so now I think our system has shifted a bit in a way to guilty until proven innocent. Because we have to combat and fight all the things that media has relayed to the everyday person who doesn't understand criminal justice or criminology quite like you and I do. But we know media exaggerates crime because that's what sells. That's what gets people to watch it, right? I hate driving. I hate it. It just drives me up a wall. I can't do it. I can do it, of course, and I can do it safely, but I just can't stand being in the car. One of the reasons is because if there's one car on the side of the road or two cars on the side of the road or there's a fender bender, everybody has to stop and see it. Why? Haven't you seen one before? I mean, come on, keep going. Unless you're going to help or do something, you would pull off to the side anyway, so just keep going, right? But the news knows that we're all interested in stopping and seeing what happened. Therefore, they overemphasize the most violent offenses. They play it on the news over and over and over and over again, and each time they're not even providing new information. They're just showing it and showing it and showing it. And the more you see it, the more you think it happens in the world around you. And it leads to this false picture of how much crime is actually happening because you just see it. And the more you see it, the more you think it truly is happening. I know I said that twice, and I want you to remember that because it's something that impacts the everyday voter. It's something that impacts the everyday conversation. And as such, it leads to really punitive attitudes on crime, right? Crime control comes into play over and over again because if we think that violent offenses are happening every second of every minute of every hour of every day, then we want that punishment to be happening. And it also increases fear. Like, oh goodness, I could be a victim of a crime because look at how much it's happening, right? And that's where my mom came into play, where she really genuinely has this fear about crime. I always, as soon as I was doing things on my own, I always remember being taught and told when I leave the house, when you're walking alone, make sure you have your keys between your knuckle. Because if you punch someone, it's going to hurt more than just your knuckles. Right? And I must have been 14 when I first was told that. And I won't tell you how old I am now, but I still inherently think like, oh, that's what I should be doing. Because that is the fear that my family instilled in me based on the media that they were consuming. It does, in fact, shape policy because legislators, they thrive on society's fear of crime, right? They need votes to win. Therefore, they need to appeal to the public. Therefore, if people are fearful of crime, they're going to create policies that are expected to alleviate some of that fear. One of the biggest high-profile cases that led to a policy change based off of all things ineffective would be the Three Strikes Law. And there's a link here for you to click. It came about in the early 90s. And I'm sure you've heard of the Three Strikes Law. You commit 3 felonies, and on that third one, you get 25 to life. In a lot of ways, it made sense to some folks. But as you watch that video that is linked here, you'll start to see, no, it isn't really helping in a lot of ways. And it stemmed from 2 tragic instances of murder of 2 young women. The war on drugs, this was really a race-based policy. It was focused on, getting drugs off our streets. It came about in 1971, and it implied that there were, in fact, differences between 2 drugs, powder cocaine and crack cocaine. And if you look, right, the difference in how much you need to have to get the same amount of years incarcerated is really drastic. 500 grams of powder cocaine got you 5 years. 5 grams of crack cocaine got you 5 years. And it really comes down to race-based behind the differences. It was the consumers, typically white individuals, would be seen using powder cocaine, so they needed to have more to receive a 5-year sentence, whereas Black individuals would have crack cocaine and they just needed less to get the same amount of years. So it really was a race-oriented policy that was developed. It has been amended. In 2010, the ratio went down to 500 grams of powder cocaine or 28 grams of crack cocaine for 5 years, and as you can see, it's still not equitable. This one is a tough one for me. Zero tolerance policies in school were developed because we wanted to make sure kids in school are safe. We wanted to make sure that kids in school who are, my least favorite phrasing, bad, were getting punished. So in the 80s and 90s, we started to see these zero tolerance policies developed that provided harsh punishments for really what normal child and development behaviors were. No, I'm not condoning violence of kids. I'm just saying that the way that we punished was a bit too punitive. And so these punishments would range from things like suspension and expulsion, and even into the realm of criminality, right? Kids who push someone once or twice, or they shoved them in the hallway, were being charged with battery. If they took something from a friend or from someone's locker, they would get charged with theft or robbery. If they talked back to their teacher, it would be disorderly conduct. And as these sorts of policies became enacted across our country, we then started to see police in school, right? How many of you who are listening to this lecture went to a school that had some amount of police officers or school resource officers within the school? Why? Why were they there? What were they doing? What was the ultimate goal of them? Do you know? Because we're going to talk about this policy again. And ultimately, these zero tolerance policies led to the school to prison pipeline. I've done a little bit of writing and research on this policy, on this pipeline. So when we get to zero tolerance school to prison, we're really going to dig much deeper into whether or not it's working. I will say that it does have a massive negative impact, particularly because theory does show us that role models and school really do reduce the likelihood of criminal behavior. So I leave you with that, and then some readings for you to look through.